Hello again. So, as the title says, in this episode I'll be sharing the dungeon cards and the tokens that I've mentioned a few times now. The ones to help generate dungeon layouts for solo games and things like that. And as usual, there's a link to the PDF file that contains the printouts down in the description, along with a sample adventure to show one of the ways that the cards and tokens can be used. Though, before I get started, I do just want to quickly say that the idea behind these isn't anything new really. There's other game systems out there that use similar ideas. All I've really done here is made a generic tool that's system neutral, so that it's something that can be used in any game. Well, most dungeon crawling games I should say. But yeah, now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Okay then, the crafting part of this episode is going to be pretty short, as all we'll need to do to make the cards is print them out. I've used some paper that's a bit thicker than normal here. I think it's 120 GSM. And it's as simple as scoring a line along the top of the cards, straight down the middle of the page, and then cutting them to size, like you can see me doing here with a sharp knife and a metal ruler. If we do that, we can then fold each card along the scored line and slide it into a card sleeve. That's all there is to it really. There's no gluing or trying to align the paper correctly for double-sided printing. They work fine just like this. So here's all of the cards when they're finished, both the passage deck and the room deck. There's 9 cards in each, though I will point out that I've also included a couple of blank cards, just in case you want to add a few custom cards of your own. Okay, next we'll make the tokens, and for these we can stick them to some thick card, 2mm thick grey board in this instance. Then, when that's dry, it's a simple matter of cutting them to size. Though, you will need a mug or a dice bag or something like that, just something to keep them in, so that one can be drawn at random at the end of each turn. And, just like the cards, I've included a few blank ones of these as well. Again, just in case you ever want to add in some extra ones at a later date. Now, the intention is that both the tokens and the cards, they can be used in conjunction with the 2D dungeon tiles that I've shared previously, as the pictures on the cards, they depict rooms and passages of the same size and shape, at least for the most part. But yeah, as I say, the idea here is that you can start a dungeon entrance looking something like this. Then, when the characters get to the unexplored part of the dungeon, you can draw a card from the relevant deck, lay out the tiles pictured on the card, then roll a d6 to see if you need to add anything extra to the room or passage in question. So, in this example, you then need to do the same thing for the other side of the T-junction, but I don't really have space here, so just pretend that I've done that, and that would then be considered the end of the turn. And at the end of each turn, a random counter is pulled from the mug. Now, most of these will be marked with an X, like this one here, which simply means nothing happens. But others will trigger traps or wandering monsters if you draw enough of them. For example, in the sample adventure that I've supplied, a group of wandering monsters appears if you ever draw 3 M tokens. And similarly, a trap is triggered when or if a third T token is pulled from the mug. Though, you can mix this up however you like. For example, you might want to explore a trap-filled dungeon with very few wandering monsters, so you could judge that there needs to be 5 M tokens in play to attract the attention of a group of wandering monsters, but it only takes 2 T tokens to trigger a trap. Like I say, it really just depends on the type of dungeon you want to play. Anyway, in addition, there's also a few R tokens, which can be used to recall all the tokens in play and put them back into the mug, a kind of unpredictable token reset, and something that also means that you'll never run out of tokens no matter how long you play for. Plus, there's also a few S tokens as well, which can be used for anything from special events to something more mundane, like it might simply mean that the party now has the option to search for a secret door, or something like that. As I say, the idea is that you can make up your own set of rules for each dungeon that you play through. And I do want to emphasise that these cards, they aren't their own game, they're just a set of simple tools to help you play existing games solo or cooperatively. And as such, that does mean that you'll also need to make a bunch of tables and charts that you can roll on to generate the different things that you might encounter in the dungeon, and in the case of monsters, it's a good idea to populate the tables with monsters that you already have models for. For example, in the sample dungeon, I've mainly used bugs and vermin in my Wandering Monster table, and then undead and evil cultists in the various monster and special rooms, mainly because I already have lots of these types of miniatures painted and ready to go. Similarly, you can also use some of the scatter terrain that you might have made to add some interest to a few of the rooms, maybe having different rules for each of them, to give the party something other than monsters to interact with, as some of the cards do prompt you to roll on a room features table, and this is the kind of thing that you might like to include in that table, things that are appropriate to the dungeon in question. Plus, the same thing can be done for various traps and hazards as well, and I have provided examples of all of these in the solo adventure that's included with these cards. And speaking of the sample adventure, I thought it might be a good idea to do a bit of a playthrough of some of that, just so that you can see how things work in practice, as I've probably not explained things very well, though again, I do want to emphasise that this is just one way that they could be put to use, one using the tables and charts that I've come up with for this specific scenario that uses the 2014 5th edition rules. Okay then, so the setup for the sample adventure is a simple one. It's one where our party of brave heroes are entering an ancient burial complex to try and prevent a group of evil cultists from reawakening some kind of undead monstrosity. And if you look at the first page of the adventure, you'll notice that I've included several key points that act as guidelines for how the mechanics of this particular dungeon works. These include things like passage doorways always lead into rooms, and room doorways have a 50-50 chance of leading either into another room or a new passage. Any stairs up lead back out of the dungeon, and any stairs down lead deeper into the dungeon where things become a bit more difficult. If there are ever 3 M tokens in play, that attracts a group of wandering monsters, and similarly 3 T tokens triggers a trap, plus any S tokens means that an area can be searched for secret doors. And as for completing the mission itself, there's actually 2 possible outcomes for this adventure, and the final quest room, if you want to call it that, that comes into play when either the 3rd special room is drawn from the card deck, or the 3rd monster room. Essentially, Scenario A is played out in place of a 3rd special room, whereas Scenario B is played out in place of a 3rd monster room. And this is just so that we don't know exactly how the adventure is going to end until we actually get there, as once one of these encounters is completed, that then marks the end of the adventure. And I think that just about sums things up, but if you take a look at the adventure itself, all of these things are explained in a bit more detail. Anyway, we'll start the adventure by laying out the entrance area, and you could do this several ways. It could be stairs down into a room that has a corridor leading away from it, or a short passage with a T-junction at the end, or maybe a longer passage with a couple of side tunnels. Either way, it's best to set things up so that there's at least 2 passages leading off from the main area. But for this example, I'm going to use the one in the middle, as it's the easiest to set up. So, here's the brave heroes entering this dark, dank dungeon. We have Ridley the rogue, Fram the fighter, Carlina the cleric, and Weatherby the wizard. And the way I'm treating the kind of exploration part of the adventure is that characters can use all of their movement each turn, essentially using the dash action to move and then move again if they need to. But they can't use that movement to enter an unexplored part of the dungeon. As such, when the party advances to the end of the passage, they will have to end their turn here while I generate the next part. So let's assume the fighter and the wizard are looking down the right passage, and to see what's there, I'll draw a card from the passage deck and roll a d6, which, as you can see, that's resulted in a short dead-end passage with a single door on one of the walls. Here's the tiles for that. And it's up to you where you place any of the doors. You could do it randomly by rolling dice. In this example, it could be odds for the north wall and evens for the south. Or you can just place them wherever it makes the most sense, as sometimes there might be other dungeon tiles in the way, so it'll be obvious where you can and can't put them. Anyway, here I did it randomly and placed it on the north wall. Next, I'll generate the other passage that the rogue and the cleric are looking down, and that means drawing another passage card and rolling another d6. And this time I got a short passage that turns off to the right, but this one's empty. And here's the relevant tiles. With that done, all the characters have now had their turn, they've moved to the junction, and I've generated all the newly revealed dungeon areas, which ends this first turn of the game. And at the end of each turn I'll need to draw a token. This time it's one marked with an X, which means nothing happens just yet. Okay, now I need to decide if I want to explore the passage to the left or the door to the right. And if you look at the adventure notes for this one, you'll see that passage doorways always lead into rooms. And since I need to explore several rooms to eventually find the quest room, it makes sense to check out this door first. Then, once the door is opened, I'll draw a room card and roll a d6 to see what lies beyond, and here I've generated an empty room with no additional doors. Though it does say on the card that I'll have to draw an extra token this round, so maybe the door made a loud creaking noise as it was opened, and that's the reason why we're upping the stakes slightly this turn. And I've pulled a T token. Now, again, if you read through the adventure notes for this scenario, you'll see that in this particular dungeon, traps are triggered when there are 3 T tokens in play, so I'm okay for now, but it is a bit worrying to have pulled one quite so early. Anyway, that brings us around to the end of the turn, which means I need to draw another token, and luckily it's another X, so nothing happens. Now, unfortunately, both the rogue and the fighter, they both only have a move of 25, so even if they double move, they can only get to here by the end of this next turn. And since I want to keep the party together, I'm going to have them all move as a group. So that's all that happens this turn, though I still need to draw a token, which is another X. And as you can hopefully see, the idea behind the tokens is that they kind of function a bit like a timer mechanic, just to help keep the game moving and to provide a sense of urgency. For example, later in the dungeon I might draw a locked door card, and even though the characters can repeatedly try to pick the lock or break the door down over and over again, each attempt will take 1 turn, and at the end of each turn I'll still need to draw another token, so I could end up spending 3 turns doing something like that, but that will increase my chances of triggering a trap or attracting the attention of wandering monsters, so it's something that needs careful consideration. But yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now though, that's this turn done, on to turn 4. Okay, the party aren't going to be able to do much this round because, as soon as I move them to here, they're going to have to stop while I generate the next part of the dungeon. In doing that, I've ended up with a long passage that ends at a T-junction, plus it also has 2 doors, which is lucky as that's going to mean more rooms to explore. Anyway, with that being the end of the turn, I draw another token, and this time it's a wandering monster token. But since it's the first one, I'm safe for now, though perhaps the party hears some echoing footsteps off in the distance, or something like that. Right then, on turn 5 the party moves up to the first of the doorways, and carefully opens it, revealing a monster room with 2 additional doors. And as you can see, I've opted to use the larger room tile here, just because it fits the space nicely. However, that does mean that in this instance there's only one wall that doesn't already connect to another part of the dungeon, so it makes sense to ignore the second door and just place the remaining door on the one wall that's suitable. But yeah, if you look at the table for monster rooms, for this adventure I've also stated that every monster room always contains at least 1 room feature as well, and rolling on the room feature table has resulted in a coffin. Now, just like the doors, it's up to you where you place any features. You could simply choose where they go, or you could randomise it. And in this example, I decided to give it a random location, so on a 1 or a 2 it was against the south wall, on a 3 or a 4 it was in the middle of the room, and on a 5 or a 6 it was against the east wall. And as you can see, it ended up being in the middle. And with this being a monster room, we're also going to need some monsters. So, on the roll of a 1, it looks like I've disturbed a couple of skeletons, which actually works out rather nicely, as maybe these are the former occupants of some of the coffins that have already broken apart. Once again, I could place them however I like, but what I've done here is simply number the tile like so, and use that to determine where they're placed, though this did result in the second one being placed on top of the terrain, so I just moved it to the nearest unoccupied square instead. That then signals the end of the round, and another token is pulled out of the cup. Okay, now that monsters are in play, I can roll initiative and play out the combat as normal, though I still need to draw another token at the end of each round, as the commotion could cause a wandering monster to be attracted by all the noise, especially since I have 2 M tokens currently in play. And when doing this, I try to have the monsters act in a suitable way, just like if I was jamming them in a regular game. though I might randomise who they attack if they have more than one character within range, or have them go after the character that just caused them the most damage, if that's ever an option. But like I keep saying, you can play it out however you like. That being said, I'm not going to do a blow-by-blow breakdown of this fight. Instead, I've played it out on the tabletop, and it ended up taking 3 rounds to finish them off. No one took any damage, I didn't even have to use any first level spells, and I ended up drawing 3 X tokens during the battle itself. So, now that the skeletons have been dealt with, I have a couple of choices. I could open the sealed coffin to see if there's any treasure inside, or I could ignore it and open the door to the north. Or I could do both, and actually, that's what I'll do. The fighter and the cleric will open the door, the rogue will open the coffin, and the wizard will watch over the rogue. Opening the door, I roll to see if it's a room or a passage. It turns out to be a room, and drawing a room card indicates that it's a special room with 1 door. And I simply decided to put that on the east wall, mainly because I know there's already a route to the passage at the top of the screen. I can get there just by turning right at the T-junction, so by placing it here, it's got more of a chance of opening up even more areas within the dungeon, if that makes sense. Anyway, rolling on the special room table indicates that this room is filled with burial niches, which I can spend time searching if I like, and at the same time Ridley opens up the coffin, but he finds nothing, just a rotten corpse inside. That then brings us to the end of the turn, which means it's time to draw another token, and this is where my luck runs out, as I get a 3rd M token. So it looks like all the commotion did indeed attract some unwanted attention. The bad luck continues with a roll of a 6 on the Wandering Monster table, and a giant spider appears in the doorway behind them. And when placing Wandering Monsters, I like to place them as far away from the party as possible, but still within line of sight. So, in this instance, the doorway made the most sense, as we can imagine the spider creeping down the passage from the unexplored T-junction at the top of the screen, approaching silently while the party have been delayed in this room. And another thing I like to do is, whenever the tokens trigger a random event like this, so a trap or a wandering monster, I also reset the tokens and return them all to the cup. This has the effect of just giving us a bit of breathing space between random encounters. Otherwise, they can really start to stack up. But yeah, I've skipped ahead again and run the combat as normal, and this time it only took 2 rounds to deal with the spider, but during that time Fram was knocked down to a single hit point and had to use his 2nd wind ability, and didn't do very well with that either, so Carlina had to use one of her healing spells to just about bring him back up to full. And at the end of the first round I drew a T token, and on the second I got an X. This next turn was basically spent just double moving into position to examine some of the burial niches in the northern room and drawing another X token from the mug. Then, on turn 13, I thought we could take the time to investigate at least 1 niche each. That's hard to say, 1 niche each, but I'll not really go into the mechanics of how some of these special rooms work, as they're all different and you can read through them yourself in the PDF. All I'll say is that the party used their main action to search, and while Fram and Carlina found nothing of interest, Weatherby did find a small trinket worth around 40 gold, and Ridley, he was rather disappointed to only discover a dead rat in the one that he was searching. Anyway, after that, the party can move over to the door, and with a free object interaction they can open it, and as usual, room doors have a 50-50 chance of leading into a room or a passage, and it ended up being a passage this time around. Now, in situations like this, you will need to play a bit fast and loose with the cards, as not only am I getting close to the edge of the table, but the passage to the south, it can't really go very far. So what I'm going to do is draw a card for each direction, and then see what will actually fit in the available space. So to the south there should be a T-junction, but I can't really have it turning to the west, as that would interfere with the room I'm currently standing in, and to the north there's a long passage that turns to the right, but that would take me off the edge of the table, unless I rearrange all of the tiles, which I really don't want to do. So in this situation, I think this is about the best that I can do. It's not exactly how things appear on the cards, but it's close enough. And with that, I think I've explained how everything kinda works, so I'll not bore you with more of this playthrough. And if you're familiar with a certain game from the late 80s, early 90s, then you might see where I got some of the inspiration for this, but I talk more about that in my recent newsletter, which is something you can sign up for if that sounds like it might be of interest. There'll be a link in the description. Anyway, before I go, I just want to say thanks to some of the people on Discord that helped me to playtest the cards a few times. Thank you very much for that. And also to the Fair Weatherman, who has a Hero Quest channel here on YouTube, as he took a look at the prototype cards and also a fan-made advanced Hero Quest scenario that I'm putting together, and gave me some feedback. He was also kind enough to mention all of this in his latest video as well. There should be a card to that in the corner of the screen, which is well worth checking out. But yeah, I think that's about it for this video, so thanks for watching as always. Please do let me know if you're actually interested in this kind of stuff, as it's not exactly my usual kind of content, but it is something I've been wanting to do for a while now. So yeah, thanks again, and with any luck, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.